is it the place of the government to make getting divorced more difficult? There's a lot of people say, divorce is too easy, and in the 1960s and 70s it became much easier. And some on the right would say that destroyed the family unit, or helped to anyway. Byron Henry, an attorney and constitutional scholar, joining us once again. Byron, welcome back.
Great to be with you, Steve.
Glad to have you here. So, in Texas, a state lawmaker says he wants to strengthen families and reinforce the sanctity of marriage by eliminating no-fault divorce. Do you think it's his place? Is it the place of the state of Texas? What do you make of it?
Well, for as long as we know, until the Supreme Court decided to stick its nose into marriage with the same-sex marriage debate, states have been the master of their own marriage laws, and so they range greatly throughout the 50 states between who you can marry and how old you can be and how long it takes to get a divorce. And some states you have to be legally separated, and other states it takes 6 months, and some states it takes a year. So, I think it is the business of the state to regulate marriage. Since they're in the business of marriage, you can debate whether they should be, but they are. And because it's such a significant and an impactful decision, and of course the family is one of the foundational institutions in history, I think this is just basically an experiment to say, hey, are we making it too easy to get divorced? Such a significant and impactful decision. So, yes, I think the state has a say in that. Now, you can debate whether that's good policy. Should you make it more expensive and harder to get a divorce? But in this case, I think Representative Krause here thinks that we should just not make it quite as easy, make it take a little bit longer, maybe give people a chance to say, we gave it a shot, or at least we gave it one more shot before our marriage fell apart, especially with the studies that say that there are a lot of people that say after the fact that they probably didn't do enough to keep their marriage together.
Well, yeah, you hear that a lot, that's for sure. And I guess if you approach it, I suppose, under the idea that you're making contract law more strict. I can see that, but because as a libertarian, kind of a libertarian bent on that, I don't think it's the government's place to say you should be married, shouldn't be married, get involved, not get involved. But if you're making it, you're strengthening a contract law. If you enter into a contract with an individual and they make it more difficult to exit that contract, that I could support, I suppose, under that rationale. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. And, of course, you've also got the secondary issue of the children factor. It's one thing to say that two people that don't have kids, there's family yet per se, except for a husband and a wife. That what are you doing telling these two people they have to stay married and making it more difficult? But once you have the collateral issues of children and all the studies that talk about children of divorces and just other issues that come out of having other people impacted by the decision other than the husband and the wife, then you start getting into reasons why you might want to add some factors and make it more difficult to get married. But yes, from a strict contract perspective, if you didn't have the collateral issues of kids, then you certainly could say, well, it should be harder to break the contract that you entered into, especially since the state has decided to sanction the contract in the first place.
Well, that part's true, and I don't think it's going to be any more difficult to get married. I mean, you're still going to have your McDonald's drive-through wedding chapels in Las Vegas and elsewhere, so, I don't think getting married is going to be any more difficult. Although I've noticed, and so have you, I'm sure, Byron, that less and less people are getting married, say, at 18 or 20. People are waiting until they're older, if they get married at all.
Yes, I think the studies show they're waiting to get married, and they're waiting to have children, and they're having fewer children. So the decision to get married is a big decision that people are waiting because it affects both themselves and their entire families, and then they're waiting to have kids because that also affects their careers and other life decisions. And so I believe all of those major life decisions, they're waiting until older in life, and maybe a maturity factor there, but you'd think that the divorce rate obviously would go down if people are waiting later in life to make these decisions with more stability and more wisdom. But the numbers seem to be, at least in Texas, where this bill was put forth, holding steady. I think the number was 3 and 7 here in Texas with respect to marriages ending in divorce, and I think that number is pretty consistent.
So there you go. Yeah, it's. I mean, the statistics about a divorce are just, well, it's awful, frankly, and it does affect children. And so you raise some good points here. My question is simply, where does it, and I haven't arrived at a conclusion yet, Byron. We've had a good conversation here. Byron Henry, attorney and constitutional scholar. I've not arrived at a conclusion as to where, the interest of the government or whatever begins and ends with the interest of the individual. So I'll give you 30 seconds for the last word.
Well, the other question that I've been asked before is whether or not this would stand up in the courts, and I just note, as I did earlier, that states normally have the right to adjust marriage, and of course you could debate whether there's a constitutional right to get a divorce, since you know that there's a constitutional right now to marry basically almost who you want. But I would say that states, for the last 150 years have been saying who can get married and who can't, and I think that probably as long as there's some rational basis between keeping a couple together a little bit longer, the courts will probably look favorable on this as long as it's applied equally to all people trying to get a divorce.
Yeah, exactly. It's got equal protection under the law. That's really what it comes down to on that provision of the conversation, correct?
That's right. As long as, with the same-sex marriage issue, you can't exclude one group of people from getting married. So as long as this applies to all marriages across the board, regardless of age, regardless of race, regardless of sexual orientation and whatnot, I think the courts are not going to have a problem with an extra, making it go from 60 days to 180 days, which is what they're proposing, and also taking out the no-fault provision and just saying you've got to have a reason for divorce. And that's just, it's like I say, it's an experiment. Who knows if it'll work? I'm with you on policy. I commend Representative Krause for attempting to try to keep families together a little bit longer and give it another shot. It just remains to be seen whether or not just making it take longer and cost more money is just going to be a boondoggle for lawyers or it's going to be good for families.
All right. Well, Byron Henry, that's a good conversation to conclude with and a good point to conclude with. Thank you so much, and have a great new year, my friend.
You too.
There you have it. Byron Henry here on the program. When we come back, Megan Barth, and then a little bit of a cherry on top. Tim Stout, the Dean of Sports, to close it out for 2016. Back after this.